Right now, as you listen to this, there is someone else inside your skull. Not a metaphor, not a mood, another mind, quieter than yours, watching the same room through the same eyes, thinking in a language that has no words. You have lived your entire life beside this stranger, and you have never once been properly introduced. Welcome. Settle in. If these slow, spacious conversations feel like home, a soft press of the subscribe button helps them find the other minds that need them. And for those who sense there is always something further beneath the surface, the truths a public feed can't quite hold, the layers the algorithm gently buries, a longer, stranger conversation waits in the quiet room, on Patreon. It is where people like us, minds that don't switch off at night, go a little deeper. The link rests in the description, whenever you are ready. Tonight, we are going to walk very slowly into your own head, into the strange fact that your brain is not one thing but two, joined by a delicate bridge of nerve fibers, each half with its own way of seeing, feeling, remembering. We will visit the surgeries that first revealed the divide, the small daily moments where the second mind whispers through, and the old, patient question of who exactly is listening right now. There is no hurry, there is only this quiet room, this breath, and the companion you are about to meet. Place a hand gently on the top of your head. Beneath your palm, under the bone, there is a soft, folded landscape, and if you could lift it into the light, the first thing you would notice is that it is not one landscape at all. It is two rounded halves, almost mirror images, nestled together like the two hemispheres of a small, private planet. We tend to picture the brain as a single organ, the way we picture the heart or the liver. But the brain is more like a pair of neighboring countries, sharing a long, quiet border. Each half has its own territory of folds and valleys, its own way of processing the world, its own specialties, and each is capable, in strange and rare circumstances, of carrying on almost alone. The scientific name for this is lateralization, the way certain functions lean, gently, toward one side or the other. But that word is thin. The reality is stranger. Imagine two neighboring cities that have grown up together, sharing power lines and roads, developing their own dialects, their own festivals, their own ways of measuring time. From the outside, they look like a single place. From the inside, they know they are two. There is something quietly astonishing about this. The body is full of paired organs, two lungs, two kidneys, two eyes, but those pairs mostly do the same job twice, as if nature were building in a spare. The brain does not do that. The two hemispheres are not backups of each other. They are collaborators, partners, sometimes in ways we will explore, gentle rivals. Evolution, it seems, discovered something, that a mind divided into two cooperating halves could do more than a mind that was simply doubled. One side could specialize in the sharp, the precise, the sequential, the ability to focus on a single thing, like the shape of a berry or the syllables of a word. The other could stay open, watchful, wide, scanning the horizon for movement, holding the whole scene at once, sensing what does not quite belong. A creature with only the first kind of attention might eat well, but never notice the predator in the peripheral shadows. A creature with only the second might see everything and grasp nothing. Together, the two form something remarkable, a mind that can zoom in and zoom out at the same time. This is the architecture you are living inside right now. As you listen, one side of your brain is likely holding the meaning of these sentences, tracking the syntax, threading word to word. The other is holding the room around you, the temperature of the air, the pressure of the pillow, the soft quality of the light or the dark. Neither could tell the whole story alone. Together, they weave the world you experience as one, and yet, most of us have spent our entire lives thinking of ourselves as a single I, a single voice, a single perspective. It is one of the tenderest illusions the brain performs, this seamless stitching of two into one, so smoothly that the seam is almost impossible to feel. Tonight, we are going to try, very gently, to feel it. Between the two hemispheres, deep beneath the surface of the brain, there is a bridge, not made of stone or wood, but of nerves, millions of them. A thick, pale band of fibers curving through the center of your head like a suspension cable strung across a valley. Its name is the corpus callosum, which sounds more solemn than it needs to. In everyday language, it is simply the crossing, the place where one mind speaks to the other. Somewhere around 200 million fibers, give or take, running side by side, each one a slender thread of living tissue, carrying a whisper of electricity from one half of you to the other, hundreds of times a second, without pause, without effort, without your knowledge. Try, for a moment, to imagine what that traffic would sound like if you could hear it. Not words, not sentences, something more like a river of soft signals, a shape here, a feeling there, a warning, a color, a memory of a face. Every time you recognize the voice of someone you love, that bridge is carrying part of the recognition across. Every time you catch a joke, one side hands the setup to the other and waits for the laugh to arrive. And when you finish a thought that started as a feeling, or turn a wordless mood into a sentence, it is because something crossed that bridge in the dark. For most of your life, this crossing is so efficient that you have no sense of it at all. The two hemispheres do not feel like two, because their conversation is faster than your awareness. By the time you notice you are thinking something, both sides have already agreed on the thought. The bridge has done its quiet work before you arrived. Some have wondered what it would be like if the bridge was slower, if the whispers took a moment longer to cross. Would you feel yourself think in stereo? Would there be a small delay between seeing a friend's face and knowing whose face it was? These are not idle questions. In certain conditions, some strokes, some rare surgeries, some moments of extreme fatigue, the crossing does slow, and people report exactly this kind of gentle doubling, a sense that meaning arrives just after perception, a subtle echo, as if the mind were catching up with itself. There is also the reverse question: what if the bridge were cut? Not damaged, not slowed, but severed entirely. 200 million fibers going silent at once. What would remain? Would the two hemispheres simply carry on, each in its own quiet room, unaware that they had ever been connected? Would each still call itself I? We will come to that story soon. It is one of the strangest chapters in the history of the mind. For now, it is enough to sit with the image of the crossing itself, a pale arc of fibers humming softly in the center of your head, translating one self to another so seamlessly that you have mistaken the translation for a single voice. There is a quiet dignity to it. Two minds, patient with each other, spending an entire lifetime in unbroken conversation, never introduced, never named, simply speaking, moment by moment, across the small luminous bridge that makes you feel like one. Reach out gently and pick up something nearby. A cup, a blanket, the edge of a page. Notice which hand moved first. You did not decide. It simply went. For most people, that first hand is the right one. For some, the left. For a small few, either will do, without much preference. This is one of the softest, most everyday clues we have that the brain is not symmetrical inside. Handedness is the surface of a much deeper asymmetry, showing through the skin. The reason your dominant hand feels like you is almost poetic. The two hemispheres of the brain do not each control their own side of the body. They cross. The left hemisphere controls the right hand. The right hemisphere controls the left. Somewhere in the base of the skull, the nerve pathways braid across each other like the strands of a rope, so that each half of the brain reaches out into the opposite half of the world. So when your right hand moves to lift the cup, it is the left side of your brain that has quietly given the order. And when your left hand rises, unbidden, to brush hair from your face, that gesture belongs to the right hemisphere. Every reaching, every gesture is a small vote from one side of your inner parliament. For a right-handed person, this means the left hemisphere has been, all your life, the one holding the pen, guiding the spoon, tying the shoe. It has practiced. It has developed a kind of confidence in the world. It is the side that most often feels like the actor, the doer, the one in charge. The other hand, the non-dominant one, feels a little slower, a little more hesitant, almost borrowed, as if it belonged to someone else who is willing to help, but does not quite know the routines by heart. There is something touching about this. Somewhere in your head lives a hemisphere that has spent decades being the quieter partner, watching the dominant side receive most of the practice, most of the trust, most of the small triumphs of everyday coordination. It is not less capable, it is simply less rehearsed, and handedness is only the beginning of what leans. Which foot you step off with, which eye you close first when you wink, which side of your mouth lifts more when you smile. Each is a small mark of the inner asymmetry, even the way you tilt your head when you listen carefully. For many people, always to the same side, carries a hemispheric signature. None of this makes one side better than the other. That is a very old myth, one worth setting down. The right hemisphere is not creative, and the left is not logical in any clean cartoon way. The reality is suppler. Both sides can do most things. They simply prefer different styles. Still, in the small choreography of daily life, the hand that reaches, the foot that leads, the ear that turns toward a whisper, you can feel, if you slow down enough, the quiet fingerprints of two minds sharing one body, one more rehearsed, one more patient, neither ever fully alone in the movement. The next time your hand rises without asking, notice it. Somewhere, softly, a decision has already crossed the bridge. Try, for a moment, to hear the voice in your head, the one that narrates, the one that just now, perhaps, silently read the word narrates, a beat after I said it. That voice, for most people, has an address. It lives mostly on the left side of your brain. In the 19th century, a French physician named Paul Broca noticed something strange about a patient who could understand everything said to him, but could only speak a single syllable. After the man died, Broca examined his brain and found a specific damaged region in the left hemisphere. Around the same time, a German neurologist named Karl Wernicke discovered another patient whose speech flowed easily but made no sense, words strung together like beads with no thread. His damage was also on the left, but in a different spot. Two small regions, in most brains sitting quietly on the left side, doing much of the work of turning thought into words and words into thought. Broca's area, near the front, shaping the mechanics of speech. Wernicke's area, further back, weaving meaning. Together, along with other regions, they form the language home of the brain, and in roughly 9 out of 10 people, that home is on the left, which is strange when you think about it. Why should something as essential as language pick a side at all? The body is symmetrical, at least on the surface. Why should the machinery of words prefer one hemisphere over the other? No one is entirely sure. One idea is that language, being a fast, sequential kind of process, one sound after another, one word after another, thrives in a region specialized for precise, ordered timing, and that kind of specialization may work better when concentrated, rather than spread evenly across both sides. So the brain quietly has chosen a room for the speaker, but here is the softly astonishing part. If language mostly lives on the left, then the right hemisphere spends its life mostly wordless. It sees, it feels, it recognizes, it knows, but it cannot in most cases easily say. It is like living beside someone who understands every conversation but rarely speaks, not because they have nothing to add, but because their fluency is of a different kind. Some have wondered whether this is why there are moods and knowings inside us that we cannot quite put into words, a grief that has no sentence, a joy that resists description, a sense that a decision is right or wrong before we can explain why. Perhaps some of those wordless certainties are the right hemisphere speaking in its own tongue, one that does not translate cleanly into language, no matter how carefully we try. And yet, the right side is not entirely mute. It handles the music of speech, the rise and fall of a voice, the sarcasm beneath the polite sentence, the tenderness inside a plain word. It hears what is said between the words. So even language, our most left-leaning gift, is a duet. The left builds the sentence, the right colors it, so that "I'm fine" and "I'm fine" can mean two entirely different things. There is something deeply human about that arrangement. A talkative half, a quiet half, neither one alone could hold the truth of what you mean. If the left hemisphere is the room where sentences are built, the right is the room where you recognize your grandmother's face across a crowded street before you know how you knew. It is a strange kind of fluency, not a fluency of words, but of shapes, spaces, patterns, feelings. The right hemisphere is unusually good at holding the whole of a scene rather than the parts. Where the left tends to zoom in, tracking details in sequence, the right tends to zoom out, taking in the gestalt, the overall pattern that lets you know, in a single glance, whether a room feels welcoming or wrong. Think about how you enter a place you have never been before. Long before you can list what is in the room, you have already sensed its mood. You know if the air is heavy, if the people are tense, if something, somewhere, is slightly off. That knowing arrives faster than words. It arrives whole. For much of that kind of perception, we lean, quietly, on the right side of the brain. The same hemisphere is deeply involved in reading faces. Somewhere in its folds, there is a small region especially attuned to the shape of a human face, its eyes, its nose, its expression. If that region is damaged, people can lose the ability to recognize even those they love most, while still being able to describe every feature. They see the face, they do not see the person. The face has been split in some sense from its meaning. Music, too, has a home on the right. Not entirely, but strongly. The way a melody lifts and falls, the way harmony feels resolved or restless, the way a song can bring you to tears without a single word being clear. Some have wondered whether music is, in a way, the language of the right hemisphere, a fluency that has always been there, waiting for the rest of us to catch up. An emotional tone, too. When someone says, "I'm fine," in that particular way that means the opposite, it is largely the right hemisphere that hears the truth beneath the words. Damage there can leave people literal, able to understand every sentence, but unable to feel its undercurrent. Life becomes strangely flat, as if everyone were reading from a script with no direction notes. There is something quietly profound in this. It means that a great deal of what we call human understanding is not verbal at all. The warmth in a voice, the heaviness in a room, the recognition of a beloved face, the pull of a song, these are not translated into words before we feel them. They arrive already meaningful, in a language older than speech, and it means that inside your head, right now, there is a mind that thinks in shape and feeling, a mind that has been reading rooms, faces and moods since before you had words, a mind that likely knew things about your life, about people you trusted, places that felt safe, choices that felt right, long before your talkative half could put those knowings into sentences. Perhaps this is why silence, for so many, is not empty at all. It is simply the moment when the wordless mind finally gets to speak in its native tongue, and the noisy mind at last stops interrupting. Long before there was a human brain to marvel at itself, the split had already begun. If you were to walk very quietly along the edge of a pond and watch the fish, you might notice, over time, that many of them turn more often to one side than the other when startled. If you were to observe a flock of chicks pecking at grain, you might see that certain kinds of tasks, like distinguishing a piece of food from a piece of gravel, are done more readily with one eye than the other. Toads have preferred sides, so do bees, so do some snails. So, in their own way, do our closest cousins, the great apes. Lateralization, this quiet leaning of the mind, is not a human invention. It is very, very old. Older than mammals, older than dinosaurs probably, somewhere back in the deep evolutionary past, when nervous systems were only beginning to knit themselves into brains. Something in the design began favoring asymmetry over perfect balance. Why? The most gentle guess is efficiency. If you are a small creature in a complicated world, you cannot afford for both sides of your brain to solve the same problem twice. It is faster, safer, better, if one side handles the fine focused task, like identifying a seed, while the other stays open to the wider world, watching for shadows overhead. A brain divided into specialists can respond more quickly than a brain that is symmetrical and second-guessing itself. There is also evidence, tentatively, from ancient skulls. When paleontologists study the inner surfaces of fossil brain cases, the faint impressions the brain once left on the bone, they sometimes notice small asymmetries, a slight bulge here, a different shape there, hints that even very old ancestors of ours, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of years ago, may have had brains that already leaned. It is delicate evidence, and interpretations differ, But the shape of the story is quietly consistent. Two-mindedness is not a modern accident. It is an inheritance. Some have wondered whether this is one of the reasons life feels the way it does, because we are the descendants of countless generations of creatures whose survival depended on being able to be, in a sense, two things at once. A creature at the pond, drinking, and a creature scanning for danger. A creature focused on the child in its arms, and a creature listening for the sound in the trees. The doubling was not a flaw. It was a gift. It allowed attention to split without shattering. It allowed the world to be both close and wide at the same moment. And here you are, tonight, the inheritor of that long, patient design. A mind that can hold a single thought and at the very same instant register the weight of the blanket, the temperature of the room, the distant hum of a street, both things at once, without conflict, both minds still. There is something almost tender in realizing that the pattern in your skull is not yours alone. It stretches backward, through countless bodies, into a very old kind of intelligence, a kind that decided, long ago, that the deepest way to know the world was to look at it from two directions at the same time, and to trust the quiet crossing between them. There is a certain kind of silence in an operating room that feels older than the room itself, the instruments laid out in a row, the lights lowered to the exact brightness required, the slow, deliberate motions of hands that have spent years learning what not to disturb. In the middle decades of the 20th century, in a handful of hospitals, surgeons began to consider something that must have seemed almost unthinkable at the time. There were patients whose lives were being consumed by epilepsy so severe, so unresponsive to every available medication, that the seizures were destroying not just their days, but their sense of self. The electrical storms would begin somewhere in one hemisphere and race across the bridge, that pale, patient corpus callosum, to engulf the other half of the brain. What if, some surgeons wondered, that crossing could be interrupted, not the hemispheres themselves, only the bridge between them? Could that gentle severing calm the storm? The procedure came to be called the split brain surgery, though that name is a little more dramatic than the reality. The hemispheres remained, only the highway between them was cut, and, remarkably, for many patients, it worked. The seizures quieted. The lightning storms, no longer able to sweep across from one side to the other, stayed local, gentler, more livable. People who had spent years afraid of their own brains were, at last, able to walk down a street, hold a job, meet a friend for coffee. What no one quite expected was what came next. At first, the patients seemed almost entirely unchanged. They came home, they spoke as they always had, they recognized their families, they read books, they laughed at jokes. To anyone meeting them, and even to themselves, there was no sense of two minds where there had been one. Life continued, apparently seamlessly. But then, in the 1960s, a scientist named Roger Sperry, along with his younger colleague Michael Gazzaniga, began to design very careful experiments. Experiments so gentle that ordinary conversation could not detect what they were about to reveal. They knew that each eye sends information not just to one hemisphere, but that the two halves of the visual field, the left and the right, are each processed by the opposite side of the brain. Anything to the left of where you are looking goes first to the right hemisphere. Anything to the right, to the left. With the bridge intact, the two sides share almost instantly. With the bridge severed, they cannot. So they showed the patients a picture, briefly, on one side of their vision. And then, very carefully, they asked what they had seen, and here the ordinary sense of a single self began, softly, to tremble. When the image went only to the left hemisphere, the talkative one, the patient could name it easily. A cup, a key, a face. When the same kind of image went only to the right hemisphere, the wordless one, something quite different happened. The patient would say, "I didn't see anything." Yet if asked to reach under a curtain with the left hand and pick out the object they hadn't seen, the hand would go straight to it. Fingers would find the key without hesitation. The mouth said, "Nothing." The hand said, "Here it is." Two answers, one skull, neither of them lying. Sperry and Gazzaniga were, in a sense, opening a door that had always been there, but that ordinary life had kept softly closed. The door between the two minds. When the corpus callosum was intact, the traffic between them was so fluid, so continuous, that the two seemed one. When it was quiet, the two hemispheres could be gently addressed one at a time, and each, it turned out, had its own perceptions, its own choices, its own kind of knowing. There was no drama in the operating room, no moment where the second self arrived. It had always been there. The surgery had simply made it visible, and ever since, a quiet question has been sitting in the background of neuroscience, and of philosophy, and of any late-night thought that wanders far enough. If two streams of awareness can be gently separated by cutting a single bridge, then perhaps the seamless I you feel yourself to be has, all along, been a duet so well rehearsed that you have mistaken it for a solo. Some of the strangest and most tender stories from the split brain patients had nothing to do with laboratories at all. They happened in kitchens, in closets, in the small, unremarkable moments of getting dressed in the morning. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, buttoning a shirt. Your right hand does what it has always done. It threads a button through a hole, then reaches for the next one, and then, quietly, without warning, your left hand rises, and with equal calm, begins to unbutton what the right just closed. You did not decide to do this. You are not angry with your shirt. You would like, quite simply, to be dressed. But there, at the end of your own left arm, is a hand acting with what feels like a mind of its own. It is not clumsy, it is not confused, it is deliberate. It knows exactly what it is doing. It just seems to disagree. This was reported in various forms by some patients after the surgery. Not all of them, not always dramatically, and usually, over time, the two hands learnt to cooperate again, as if the rest of the brain, the deeper structures beneath the bridge, helped the hemispheres find a working truce. But in the early period, and in rarer cases from other causes, the phenomenon was clear enough to have earned a gentle name. Alien hand, as if one of your own hands had become, briefly, a polite stranger. There is something almost comic about the descriptions. A hand that reaches into the closet and picks a different shirt than the one the other hand had chosen. A hand that puts down a book the other was reading. A hand that, at dinner, unfolds a napkin the other had just set aside. Nothing violent. Nothing frightening. Simply another opinion, expressed in the only language the wordless side had. Movement. Sit with that for a moment. Because the everyday assumption we live inside is that our body is the instrument of a single will. When your hand moves, you moved it. When your fingers reach, you reached. The idea that a hand could act intentionally, on its own preferences, without asking permission from the you who narrates the day. This is not just strange, it is quietly destabilizing to the idea of a unified self, and yet, the patients themselves rarely described it in dramatic terms. Many spoke of the alien hand with a kind of gentle bemusement. Some gave it a name, some scolded it lightly, some simply learnt to hold it still with the other hand when it started to interfere. There is something disarming about that. When faced with evidence that another mind is sharing their body, most people did not panic. They negotiated, perhaps because, on some level, we already sense this. Anyone who has ever meant to stop scrolling and found their thumb still swiping. Anyone who has reached for one more piece of chocolate while another part of them clearly said no. Anyone who has watched their own mouth say something they had not planned to say. The experience of parts of ourselves acting slightly out of sync with the I we identify with is not exclusive to split-brain patients. It is a quieter, everyday version of the same phenomenon. In them, the seam was simply more visible. Ownership of the body, it turns out, is a subtle and constantly renewed feeling. It is not automatic. The brain works, moment by moment, to produce the sense that this hand is mine, this leg is mine, this voice is mine. When the bridge between hemispheres is cut, that sense of unified ownership can fray in small, revealing places, and in those places we glimpse something honest. That I is not one commander sitting at the top of the body, issuing orders. It is a kind of standing agreement between several willing partners. Most of the time, they agree so smoothly that the agreement disappears into the feeling of a single self. But now and then, in the split-brain stories and in your own small daily surprises, one of the partners speaks with its own voice, and when your own hand disagrees with you, it is worth pausing, softly, and asking who exactly you are disagreeing with. because it is not a stranger. It has always been at the end of your arm. It has always been part of the story. It has only, tonight, been given permission to speak. The experiments that followed the first split brain observations became more delicate, more inventive, and, in a way, more haunting. Because if the two hemispheres could be shown different things, an image on the left, a word on the right, then they could be quietly asked, separately, what they thought. And sometimes their answers did not match. Imagine sitting in a small, softly lit room. A researcher asks you to look at a point in the middle of a screen and keep your eyes there, just for a moment. Then, faster than you can turn your gaze, an image flashes on the left side of the screen, going only to your right hemisphere, and a different image flashes on the right, going only to your left. Two pictures, two hemispheres, one skull. What did you see? The researcher asks. Your mouth, guided by the left hemisphere, answers with the image on the right side of the screen. That is the only picture the talking side can name. But when the researcher asks your left hand, using pointing or drawing, to answer the same question, it chooses the other image, the picture the right hemisphere saw. Not because you are being tricky, because, in a very literal sense, two different perceptions are living side by side inside you, and they are giving two different answers. Now imagine the images are not just objects. Imagine one is a color. In some tests, one hemisphere reported preferring one color and the other, another. In others, the two sides seem to have differing preferences about foods, or holidays, or what they would like to do next. The two halves were not disagreeing about facts of the outside world. They were disagreeing about taste, about preference, about what felt right. There is something quietly staggering about that. Because preference, what we like, what we want, what we choose, is close to the heart of what we mean by self. When we say, I love this song, or I don't want to go there, we assume there is a single I doing the loving and the not wanting. The split brain experiments hint that even those small personal statements may sometimes be the sum of two voices, one of them slightly outvoted, more gently, and perhaps more strangely. Some experiments suggested that the two hemispheres could hold different beliefs. If one side was shown information that the other did not receive, each could form its own understanding of a situation. The talking side would report the version it knew. The silent side, if given a way to point or gesture, would answer differently. Neither was wrong. Each was simply working with the information it had. Some have wondered what this means for us, those of us with intact bridges. In everyday life, our two hemispheres are constantly sharing. There is no need for a separate answer, because both sides are in the loop. And yet, perhaps some of what we call inner contradiction, that sense of wanting two things at once, of being pulled in two directions, of half loving something we also half fear, has always been a very quiet echo of this experimental fact. Two ways of seeing, arriving at slightly different conclusions, then being blended by the bridge into something that only feels like a single verdict. Consider how often, in ordinary life, you have said one thing and felt another. How often the words that came out of your mouth described a preference your body did not quite agree with. How often, moments after a decision, some small, quiet part of you seemed to know that a different choice would have been kinder to some deeper piece of yourself. The split brain experiments do not fully explain those moments, but they open a door. They suggest that I is not a single unanimous voice. It is an ongoing negotiation between minds that mostly, but not always, want the same things. And perhaps this is why, in some ancient traditions, wisdom has been described as the art of listening carefully to yourself. Because if there is more than one self, then wisdom might not be a matter of shouting louder. It might be a matter of hearing more. Two answers, one question, one skull. It is a small, elegant reminder that inside you, right now, several perspectives are quietly sharing the same seat, and that when they agree, it feels like knowing, and when they disagree, it feels like a mystery, and that both, in their own way, are honest reports from the mind you are still getting to know. Perhaps the tenderest discovery of the split brain research was something Michael Gazzaniga came to call the interpreter, because it revealed not just that we have two minds, it revealed how one of those minds spends much of its time gently, endlessly, telling itself the story of a single self. The experiment went something like this. A split-brain patient was shown two images at once, one to each hemisphere. To the left hemisphere, the talking one, a picture of a chicken's foot. To the right hemisphere, the wordless one, a picture of a snowy scene. Then the patient was asked to point, with each hand, to a matching image from a set of options. The right hand, controlled by the left hemisphere, pointed to a chicken. The left hand, controlled by the right hemisphere, pointed to a snow shovel, perfectly sensible. Chicken foot and chicken, snow and shovel. Then the researcher asked, gently, "Why did you choose those?" Only the left hemisphere could answer, because only the left had language, and it had seen only the chicken foot. It had never seen the snow. But when asked why the left hand had pointed to the shovel, the patient did not say, "I don't know." The patient's talking hemisphere paused for a fraction of a second, then answered, quite confidently, "Oh, that's easy. The shovel is for cleaning out the chicken coop." A perfectly coherent story, completely invented, told without any sense that it was invented. And here is the quiet, revealing part. The patient did not feel like they were lying. They felt like they were explaining. The left hemisphere, faced with an action it had not authorized, the left hand pointing to a shovel, did what it does all day, in every one of us. It reached for a reason. It stitched the observed behavior into a plausible story. It filled the gap, smoothly, naturally, without hesitation. Gazzaniga called this the interpreter, because that is what it seems to do. It interprets. It watches what the body is doing, what the emotions are doing, what the other parts of the brain are up to, and it weaves a narrative in real time, a narrative in which I am the author of what is happening, a narrative in which every action has a reason, and every reason belongs to me. The tender realization is that this interpretation does not stop with split-brain patients. It is happening in you, right now. When you catch yourself and ask, "Why did I say that?" some part of your brain quickly offers an answer. When you notice you have been in a bad mood and wonder why, a story arrives, plausible, coherent. Whether that story is the true cause or a reconstruction after the fact is not something the interpreter can easily tell you. Its job is not to be exactly right. Its job is to keep the narrative whole. Some have wondered how much of our life story, then, is honest reporting and how much is a beautifully written after-the-fact explanation. Not lies, not delusion, something gentler, a patient, well-meaning storyteller, doing its best to give shape to a life that is, moment by moment, actually the collaboration of many quieter systems, hormones, memories, wordless intuitions, bodily sensations, most of which never announce themselves in language. There is something oddly comforting in this, because it means that if you have ever felt confused about your own behavior, if you have ever wondered why you did something even after you have given yourself an explanation for it, you are not broken. You are simply catching a glimpse of the interpreter at work. You are noticing the seam, and it invites a softer relationship with your own reasons. When you find yourself, tonight, telling a small story about why you felt sad today, or why you snapped at someone, or why you love the things you love, you might hold that story a little more loosely, not as a lie, not as a truth carved in stone, but as a story your kindly interpreter has offered from the incomplete information it had, because the deeper self, the wordless companion in the other hemisphere, the many-voiced parliament beneath the narration, has reasons it may never fully explain in language, and your interpreter, meanwhile, is doing its patient everyday work, keeping the story whole, so that you can carry on being what you have always felt yourself to be, a single coherent I, walking gently through the world, even if that I is in truth a story being told. Not every right hemisphere is entirely wordless. In most people, language leans, as we have seen, toward the left. But brains are gentle, adaptive things, and in some individuals, especially those who experienced early damage or unusual patterns of development, the right hemisphere has quietly learnt to hold at least some words, small vocabularies, simple phrases, the occasional yes or no. In split-brain research, this rare group opened a door that had been, until then, only slightly ajar, because here, at last, the silent partner could answer for itself. In careful experiments, researchers asked questions that could only be answered by the right hemisphere, using its limited language. And what came back was, at times, remarkable. Not because it was dramatic, because it was different. When asked about occupation, the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere could offer slightly different answers about what the person wanted to be when they grew up. When asked about likes and dislikes, the two sides sometimes gave subtly different preferences. When asked to describe themselves, small divergences appeared. The right hemisphere did not contradict the left in a hostile way. It simply had, in a soft and steady way, its own view. Imagine that for a moment. Imagine sitting quietly with yourself and being able to ask, "What do you want?" and receiving one answer from the talkative side and another from the quiet side. Not wildly opposed, just gently different. As if two people had been asked the same question about a life they shared. Some patients, when they realized this, described the experience with a kind of wondering calm, as if they had discovered, late in life, a very familiar companion they had never quite noticed was there. Neither side felt more real than the other. Both had been present, contributing, all along. It was only that the conversation had, for the first time, become audible. Some have wondered what to make of this philosophically, because if the right hemisphere, given a bit of language, can express a slightly different self, a self with its own preferences, its own history, its own emotional landscape, then in most of us, that self is still there, silent, mostly, wordless, mostly, but present, feeling, remembering, wanting, simply without a microphone. And that raises a question that is difficult to hold and difficult to release. When we speak about ourselves, who exactly is speaking? Only the half that has learnt to talk? And what of the other half, whose desires and impressions may sometimes be sensed, but rarely stated? Is it not also part of who we are? And if so, how often, in a life full of words, has that other half been consulted? The gentleness of this question is important. It is not meant to unsettle. It is meant to soften. Because if you have ever felt that your life, in some sense, was not entirely yours, that decisions were made by a version of you that you did not fully recognize, that you have followed roads chosen more by circumstance than by inner voice, this may not be a failure of self-knowledge. It may be, in part, the natural experience of a being whose two hemispheres do not always share the microphone equally. There is a quiet dignity in even considering this possibility. To imagine that inside you lives another self, mostly silent, mostly patient, occasionally offering its own answer to the questions of life. Not as an intruder, as a lifelong companion, one that has felt every sunset with you, held every hand you have ever held, sat through every conversation you thought you were having alone. And perhaps this is why moments of quiet, before sleep, during a walk, in the middle of a piece of music that stops the day for a moment, feel so full. In those pauses, the noisy hemisphere hushes just a little. The talker finally listens, and the other side, given room, offers its own soft answer to the question you did not know you were asking. There is no dramatic reveal in such moments, no sudden voice, only a feeling, perhaps a small tilt in the mood, a sense that something inside has been heard. That is what it seems to sound like when the wordless mind, at last, speaks its own kind of yes. All of this, the surgeries, the hands that disagreed, the two answers to one question, the interpreter weaving stories, the wordless side finally given a voice, brings us, gently, to a question that has troubled philosophers for a very long time. Is consciousness one thing, or is it many things pretending, very well, to be one? For most of history, human beings have assumed the answer was obvious. Consciousness is one. There is a single self inside you, looking out, a single observer, a single I. The unity of experience felt so total, so unquestionable, that no other possibility seemed serious. When you looked at a sunset, one being was seeing it. When you felt joy, one being was feeling it. There was you, and there was the world, and there was nothing more to say. The split-brain research, softly and without ever intending to, complicated that picture. Because if a person, after surgery, can have one hemisphere name an object, while the other reaches for something entirely different, if one side of the brain can be shown information the other never learns about, and each can respond in its own way, then in what sense are they still one conscious being? And if two streams of awareness can be gently separated by cutting a bridge of fibers, what does that say about the I you feel yourself to be right now when that bridge is still perfectly intact? There are essentially two soft directions to move in, and each is worth sitting with. One direction says, consciousness is more layered and more plural than we have realized, that inside every skull there may already be multiple streams, hemispheric, modular, subsystem, and that our sense of unified selfhood is a beautifully maintained illusion, a stitching together of many voices into one. In this view, the split brain patients are not creating a second self, they are simply making visible one that was always there. Another direction gently pushes back. It says, perhaps consciousness itself is not so easily divided. Perhaps what the experiments reveal is a division of information, not of experience. The patients themselves, after all, mostly reported feeling like one person, one self, walking through their days. They did not describe living inside two lives. Whatever consciousness truly is, it may be something that resists being cleanly split. Both positions have thoughtful people defending them, and both, when held with humility, gesture at the same underlying mystery, which is that no one, at present, fully knows what consciousness is. Not the philosopher, not the neuroscientist, not the meditator. We know a great deal about the correlates of consciousness, which brain regions light up, which rhythms accompany awareness, which chemicals shift the flavor of experience. But the fact of experience itself, the felt there is something it is like to be me, has, so far, resisted every attempt to explain it away, and so we are left in a beautiful position, with a self that feels one, with a brain that behaves, in some experiments, like two, with a philosophical tradition that has argued for millennia about what any of this means, with the honest admission that our current models attempt to explain how experience arises, but rarely, if ever, why. The deeper why remains where it has always been, somewhere just beyond our reach. Some have wondered whether this is a limit we can eventually cross, whether one day a future understanding of the mind will resolve the puzzle, and we will know, with clarity, what consciousness is and how many of it there are inside a single head. Others have wondered whether it is a limit built into the very nature of self-observation. The mind, trying to see itself clearly, is like an eye trying to see itself directly. Something in the geometry of the situation may keep the answer softly out of view. Neither possibility is frightening. Both are, in their way, spacious, because they leave room for the wordless partner in your skull to remain something you can feel without fully explaining, room for the you who is listening tonight to be at once perfectly ordinary and gently unresolved, room for tomorrow's science and yesterday's wisdom and tonight's quiet to all be true at once. Whatever consciousness is, it is what is present right now. As these words move through you, that at least is not in question. Everything else, one room, two rooms, or something older than rooms, is a mystery you get to carry, softly, into sleep. Now that we have met, gently, the second mind that lives inside the skull, something interesting begins to happen when we return to ordinary life. Because if the two hemispheres are always in conversation across the bridge, then every moment of your day, even the smallest, dullest, most familiar one, becomes a quiet act of translation. Consider a joke. Someone tells you one. Not a great one, maybe. A gentle one. The setup arrives, sentence by sentence. Your left hemisphere, doing much of the heavy lifting of language, is following the words, holding the syntax, tracking the story. Then the punchline lands, and in that fraction of a second before you laugh, something else happens. The pattern of the words shifts, the expectation breaks, and the meaning changes shape. The right hemisphere, which specializes in wholeness and context, and the sense of things not quite fitting, catches the shift. It knows something has just become funny. It hands that knowing back across the bridge. The left provides the words to describe why the joke was good. Both sides have done their part. You laugh, or think of a song you love. The first few notes arrive. Your right hemisphere recognizes the melody almost instantly, in a way that has little to do with words. Meanwhile, your left may be able to name the song, the artist, the year you first heard it. Together, in some kind of instant duet, They produce the feeling of this song. Neither could deliver that feeling alone. Both are needed. Or a face. A person you know steps into the room. Long before you name them, your right hemisphere has already recognized the shape of the face, its familiar features, the small particular quality of expression. Your left will supply the name a moment later, if it comes at all. Sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you know a face perfectly, feel every affection you have ever felt for its owner, and cannot for the life of you recall their name. That is not a failure of memory. It is a small delay in the translation between the mind that knows people and the mind that labels them. Everyday life, seen this way, is not a monologue. It is a hidden dialogue, running beneath every experience. And the dialogue is so continuous, so smooth, that we do not experience it as conversation at all. We experience it as the ordinary world. Some have wondered how much of what we call intuition, or common sense, or a good sense of atmosphere, is really the residue of this constant translation. When you walk into a room and feel that the mood is off, some part of your right hemisphere has already read the wholeness of the scene, the posture of the people, the tension in the voices, the small quiet in unusual places, and has crossed the bridge to your left with a wordless report. Your left then tries to put that report into language. Sometimes it succeeds. Sometimes it can only manage. Something feels wrong here, but I couldn't tell you why. That couldn't tell you why is not ignorance. It is often the truth of a translation that is not quite finished. The knowing arrived before the words. There is something quietly beautiful in this, because it means that every simple moment of understanding, every glance across a room, every recognition of a mood, every appreciation of a familiar song, is the result of two minds meeting in the middle, moment after moment, without asking to be thanked. Neither takes credit. Neither claims the experience. They simply do what they have always done, and you get to have a life that feels seamless. And it invites a very gentle shift in how we hear ourselves. When we say, "I understand," we might quietly remember that the understanding was assembled. When we say, "I got the joke," we might notice that "I" was, in that instant, at least two. And when we struggle to say why something moved us, we might allow the not saying to be a kind of respect for the other half, the one that felt it, wordlessly, before I arrived. The dialogue does not need to be interrupted. It only, sometimes, needs to be noticed. Intuition is a strange word. Everyone knows what it feels like, and no one can quite say what it is. A hunch, a gut feeling, a small internal tug in the direction of yes or no, before any argument has been made. It is one of the most common experiences we have, and one of the least understood. If the last section is any hint, we can begin to guess where at least part of intuition may live. Imagine you are walking down an unfamiliar street at dusk. Nothing overtly threatening is happening. There is a person up ahead, a car passing, a lit window, and yet, for reasons you cannot easily explain, you feel a soft impulse to turn a different way. You do not think, statistically, this street has a slightly higher rate of unpleasant encounters at this hour. You just feel, quietly, that you would rather not walk down it. That feeling, arriving without a sentence, may be the wordless mind speaking, because the right hemisphere, as we have noticed, is unusually good at reading whole patterns. Faces, moods, atmospheres, and the parts of the brain that generate emotional responses, the deeper, older structures beneath the hemispheres, are constantly comparing the current situation to a lifetime of remembered situations. Somewhere in that comparison, small warning signs may be recognized long before the talking side of the mind has any language for them. The result, felt in the body and in the mood, is intuition, not magic, not mysticism, simply the accumulated wisdom of a very old and very attentive part of you, reporting in a language that has no vocabulary but is deeply articulate in feeling. Some have wondered whether this is why intuition is so often described in bodily terms: a gut feeling, a chill down the spine, a sinking in the chest. Because the wordless mind speaks through the body more than through sentences. It cannot say, "I have noticed several small inconsistencies in this situation that trouble me." It can only nudge the belly, tighten the shoulders, quicken the breath, and you, the narrating self, receive a feeling, sometimes accurate, sometimes not, sometimes precise, sometimes fogged with other things. Trusting intuition is therefore a delicate practice. It is not always right. The wordless mind can be mistaken. It can carry old fears from long past situations that no longer apply. It can be swayed by tiredness, hunger, or the weather. Sometimes an intuition is a signal. Sometimes it is a leftover. Wisdom is not blindly following it. Wisdom is including it in the conversation. And yet, there is a kind of humility in even noticing intuition properly. Because when you sense something without words, you are being asked to trust a part of yourself you cannot fully hear. A part that is not going to defend itself with an argument. A part that, if ignored too often, may go quiet, letting the noisier side make all the decisions. Many people, later in life, describe a sense of having stopped listening to something inside them at some point, and only now, in quieter years, learning how to hear it again. There is a small wow tucked inside this idea, that the very thing we call gut feeling, often dismissed as unreliable, may be one of the most sophisticated products of the human brain. Millions of pattern recognitions happening below the surface, whole scenes read at once, small anomalies noticed and passed upward as a soft nudge. It is a feat of processing that no explicit reasoning could match in the time available. To live well with intuition is not to obey it. It is to include it. To pause when the wordless mind offers its quiet report. To ask what it might be responding to weigh it, together with reasoning and evidence, and then to decide from a place that has heard both minds. You have been consulting this hidden advisor your whole life, whether you noticed or not. Tonight might be a good night to say, quietly, thank you. Then there is the moment we call insight, the small pop of a new idea, the answer you are looking for that suddenly, quietly, arrives while you are doing something else entirely. It usually does not come while you are trying. It comes in the shower, on a walk, in the drift just before sleep. That timing is not accidental. It is one of the softest hints we have about how the two hemispheres cooperate to make something new. For years, researchers have watched what happens in the brain in the moments right before an insight, not solving a problem step by step, but suddenly seeing it whole. What they have noticed, in various careful studies, is that just before that aha moment, there is often a small burst of activity in certain regions of the right hemisphere, somewhere in the pattern-reading, whole-holding side of the brain. Connections that had been quietly developing beneath awareness rise into consciousness in a single, unified flash, and here is the gentle wow of it. The insight itself feels like it comes from nowhere, but it does not come from nowhere. It comes from the wordless mind, which has been quietly turning the problem over, feeling its edges, sensing where the shape might close. When it finally does close, that closure is passed across the bridge, and the talking mind gets to say, I've got it, as if the credit belonged entirely to language. It is a little like a friend who does most of the thinking in silence, and then hands you the finished sentence just before you say it out loud. This is also why so many creative traditions treasure states in which the noisy mind can rest. Long walks, repetitive tasks, being on the edge of sleep, sitting in a bath, staring out a window at nothing in particular. In each of these, the constant chatter of the left hemisphere softens, and the wider, wordless attention of the right has room to move. Ideas that have been trying to arrive can finally cross the bridge. The relationship between the two sides, in creativity, is not a competition. The right does not do the work while the left takes credit. It is more like a partnership between two temperaments. The right holds the whole of the problem in its wide gaze, sensing where pieces might fit. The left provides structure, the language, the sequence, the small logical checks that turn a raw insight into something usable. Neither can produce a real, finished idea alone. A brilliant vision without language is inexpressible. A well-formed sentence without vision is empty. Consider a poet at a desk. There is a moment before a good line arrives. The mind is watching. Nothing is happening. Then something shifts. A phrase appears, almost formed. The poet writes it down. Later, they may edit, refine, rearrange. But that first arrival was not built by conscious construction. It was received. Then the crafts of language went to work. Consider a scientist puzzling over a stubborn problem. They read, they calculate, they try. Then they go for a walk. Something clicks, softly, on a bench somewhere. They rush back to their desk. Now the left hemisphere gets busy again, testing, formalizing, checking. But the seed of the answer arrived in stillness. Some have wondered whether this is why so much of what we call genius is described as inspiration rather than achievement, because the maker themselves knows that the deepest ideas do not feel manufactured. They feel visited, not by external forces necessarily, but by an inner self that they did not fully control. There is something reassuring in this for anyone who has ever tried to force creativity by sheer effort and failed. The wordless mind cannot be bullied, but it can be trusted. It can be given room. It can be invited into the day by walks, by silence, by patience, by the willingness to think about nothing for a while. Every idea you have ever had was, in some quiet sense, a gift from the other side. Emotion is where the two minds may become most visibly different in temperament. There is a soft pattern that has appeared in the research over decades. On one side, roughly, the brain seems to lean toward what has been called approach, curiosity, warmth, the impulse to move toward. On the other side, it seems to lean toward withdrawal, caution, watchfulness, the impulse to hold back. This is not a clean division. There are exceptions. There is much still being learned, but the general shape is worth sitting with because it hints that mood may not be a single weather system in your head. It may be a slow, ongoing negotiation between two different emotional temperaments. Think of a moment when you have felt torn. Someone offers you an invitation. Part of you, perhaps the warm, curious part, wants to say yes. Another part, perhaps the cautious, protective part, wants to say no. Neither is wrong. Each is offering something valuable. The yes mind sees the connection, the adventure, the small unknown that could become meaningful. The no mind sees the tiredness, the risk of overextension, the quiet need for rest. In a healthy mind, they consult each other. In a strained one, they can pull sharply against each other, leaving the you who has to decide feeling small and exhausted. Now imagine what happens if one side has been listened to more than the other for a very long time. If you have always answered yes to invitations, ignoring the cautious voice, the withdrawal side may eventually feel unheard. It may start to speak more loudly, through fatigue, through a growing reluctance, through a mood that seems to descend for no reason. And if you have always answered no, the approach side may quiet down over time until warmth and curiosity themselves begin to feel far away. Some have wondered whether certain kinds of persistent sadness are, in part, this kind of long unheard voice, a hemisphere, an emotional temperament, a subsystem, whatever the deepest name for it is, that has been asking, gently, for its turn to speak, and has been overruled again and again by the busier, noisier partner. That does not mean sadness has one simple cause. Emotion is complex, influenced by countless factors, including biology and circumstance. But it does invite a softer question. If you have felt low for a while, have you asked yourself which part of you feels unheard? The image of two temperaments is not meant to be a diagnosis. It is meant to be a doorway, a way of realizing that when you feel two things at once, you are not confused. You are correctly reporting the shape of your inner life, a mind that feels both drawn and cautious, both eager and tired, both hopeful and hesitant, is not a failing mind. It is a whole mind. There is something quietly relieving about that, because the ordinary language of self-help often speaks as if mood should be tidy, as if you should either be happy or work on being happy, as if inner contradiction is a problem to be solved. What the two-minded picture suggests is subtler. Some contradictions may not be problems at all. They may be the natural sound of a self that is more than one thing. Living well with this may mean less trying to make yourself feel one way, and more listening to the several ways you already feel. Ask in the approach side, quietly, what it wants to move toward. Ask in the withdrawal side, quietly, what it wants to protect. Both are honest witnesses. Both have something to say that the other cannot quite say, and when they are both heard, a curious thing tends to happen. The mood softens, not because contradiction has been erased, because it has been given room to breathe. The two temperaments, when they feel listened to, tend, more often than not, to reach a gentler agreement than the you who insisted on choosing. Emotion, seen this way, is not weather. It is a conversation. Between two minds, and many quieter ones, sharing a single life, hoping to be heard. There is a place, every night, where the two minds meet in unusual light. We call it sleep. And within sleep, within the particular hush of dreaming, something soft and interesting seems to happen between the hemispheres. During ordinary waking life, the crossing between the two sides is busy, fast, and closely coordinated. During deep, dreamless sleep, both sides quiet down together, resting in slow, synchronized rhythms. But in the strange in-between state called REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep, the state in which most vivid dreams occur, the pattern shifts. The bridge, in some sense, becomes less rigid. The relative activity of the two hemispheres changes, and into that gentler arrangement, dreams arrive. No one fully knows why we dream. There are many careful theories, and each captures a piece. Dreams may help consolidate memory. Dreams may help emotional regulation. Dreams may be the mind's way of rehearsing possible futures, or reconciling old pieces of experience, or simply being active during a time when the body is safely still. Any honest account must admit that the full purpose of dreaming remains, in large part, an open question. But some have wondered whether dreams are, in part, the right hemisphere's rare turn to narrate. During waking life, the talking side of the brain does most of the storytelling. It labels, sequences, names, explains. In dreams, that side seems, at times, to loosen its grip. Language becomes strange. Sequences break. Images grow wildly whole and symbolic. Faces of loved ones appear in impossible places. Rooms open into rooms. Emotions run stronger than plot. It looks, in many ways, like the kind of experience the wordless mind might produce if it were left alone to tell a story its own way. Then morning arrives. You wake. The talking mind wakes with you and immediately tries to organize what just happened. It reaches for words. It tries to line the dream up into a sequence, and here it often struggles because the dream was not made in language. Trying to describe it feels like trying to translate music into a grocery list. Something of the original slips away in the retelling. This is not a failure of memory. It is in some sense the natural mismatch between two languages. The dreaming self spoke in shape, in emotion, in image. The waking self can only try to render that into sentences. What remains is a shadow of the original, sometimes moving, sometimes strange, sometimes deeply resonant, but rarely complete. Consider how often a dream that felt overwhelming while it was happening becomes, in words, oddly small. I dreamed I was in a house I had never seen, and I was afraid, and there was a door. The story, told this way, cannot carry the atmosphere. The atmosphere was the point, and atmosphere is the wordless mind's native tongue. There is a small wow in this, that every morning most of us wake up carrying, in our recent memory, the fading pattern of the other mind's story, not as an intruder, as a report from the half of ourselves that does most of its thinking without language. Whether we listen or not, whether we remember or not, that report has been offered. Some traditions, ancient and modern, have taken dreams seriously as a place where the deeper self can be heard, not as prophecy necessarily, as a form of self-listening, to pay attention to the mood of a dream more than its story, to notice which images returned, to sit, gently, with the feelings that lingered on waking. In doing so, we allow the wordless mind a place at the day's table, even if only briefly, and there is something quietly comforting about that, because it means the two minds have not been separated in the darkness. They have simply changed which one is doing more of the speaking. All night, in the softness of REM, the right hemisphere has been offering images. The left, gently subdued, has been listening more than usual. In the morning, the dialogue shifts back, but something of the exchange remains, folded into the mood you carry into the day. Sleep is, in some sense, the place where the two minds meet as equals. Who is the I? Let us return gently to the smallest and largest question. Who is the I that has been listening? For most of a life, the answer feels obvious. You are you. There is a single point of view behind your eyes, a single voice in your head, a single someone who woke up this morning and remembered being the person who fell asleep last night. The feeling of a unified self is so continuous, so total, that it barely feels like a feeling at all. It feels like a fact, but when we begin to look closely at how that sense of self is produced, something quieter emerges. Because the brain, so far as science can tell, is not a single command center with a single voice at the top. It is a vast humming community of processes, some fast, some slow, some conscious, some entirely below awareness, each doing its own specialized work. Vision, balance, memory, language, emotion, attention, hormonal timing, breathing, countless smaller systems, each running its share of the show, and yet, out of all this quiet complexity, a single, seamless experience arises, a single I. One influential picture in modern cognitive science suggests that the brain is, in a sense, constantly predicting the world. Rather than simply receiving sensory data and reacting, the brain is proposing hypotheses about what is out there and what is likely to happen next. Each moment, it compares its predictions with what actually arrives from the senses, adjusts and updates. In this view, perception is not so much a reception as a construction, a very fast, very refined guessing game that usually happens to guess correctly. If this picture is roughly right, then the self may be one of the brain's most patient guesses, a model, not a thing, not an object sitting inside the head, but a stable, ongoing hypothesis about who is having these experiences and why. A useful, sensitive, deeply believable prediction that someone is here, doing this life. That does not mean the self is a lie. It means the self is a construction. There is a difference. A house is a construction. It is not a lie. It is built, patiently, out of materials, and it is very real to live in. Selfhood may be similar, built, patiently, out of memory, attention, body sensations, expectations, and countless smaller signals, and once built, entirely real to inhabit. The idea is quietly astonishing, because it suggests that the you who is listening right now is not a fixed, separate soul thing that has been dropped into a brain. It is more like a continuously updated portrait, painted every moment by the brain itself, based on what it senses, remembers, expects, and feels. When you wake, the portrait is refreshed. When you go to sleep, it softens. When something disrupts it, anesthesia, deep meditation, certain unusual experiences, the portrait can grow strange, thin, even briefly disappear before quietly rebuilding itself. There is something tender in this way of thinking, because it means the self is not carved in stone. It is being made, patiently, right now. Every thought, every mood, every small choice contributes to the next version of the portrait. What you attend to becomes part of who you are. What you overlook, in time, fades. And yet, this is not a picture without a mystery. Because even if we accept that the self is a construction, the question remains, why is there anyone home to experience the construction? Why is there something it is like to be this self, rather than nothing? A machine could, in principle, produce a very sophisticated model of itself without there being any inner experience of what that is like. And yet, in you there is. There is a felt quality to being here. That felt quality, some have called it the hardest question, remains honestly open. Different traditions and thinkers have offered different possibilities. Some suggest it emerges naturally from complex information processing, though how remains hotly debated. Some propose it is a more fundamental aspect of reality than physics alone can capture. Some hold that the answer lies beyond what human minds can fully model of themselves. Others sit with the humility that the question may be, at bottom, unresolved. And this is a gentle invitation to hold the I a little more loosely, not to reject it, not to fear it, simply to notice, tonight, that the very center of your experience is one of the most beautiful and unfinished puzzles you carry, and that all the science and philosophy in the world has not yet said the final word on it. Perhaps it never will. Perhaps that, too, is part of the gift. If the self is not a single thing but a construction, what exactly is being constructed? One of the most quietly useful pictures modern cognitive science has offered is the idea that the mind is a bit like a large, well-run committee, not a metaphor of chaos, a metaphor of specialization. Different regions and networks in the brain handle different jobs, and each contributes, in its own moment, to the flow of experience. There is a network mostly involved in tracking your body's position in space, another mostly involved in remembering where things are, another mostly involved in reading faces, another in tracking the passage of time, another in noticing which of your own thoughts belong to the past and which to the future, another in coordinating emotion with reasoning, another in maintaining a background hum of self-monitoring so that you can catch yourself mid-mistake and adjust. Each of these operates, most of the time, quietly and independently. You are not aware of most of them. You're only aware of the results. But every experience you have, from something as small as recognizing a coffee cup to something as vast as remembering an important conversation from years ago, is the collaboration of many such modules running together, sharing their outputs, and letting one voice, the conscious one, speak on behalf of them all. Some have described this using the image of a stage. Backstage, many actors, technicians, and set designers are doing their work. On stage, in the spotlight, only a small portion is visible at a time. Consciousness may be something like the lit stage, the small glowing space where one part of the ongoing production becomes visible. Everything else is still happening, still contributing, still necessary. It is simply behind the curtain. Attention, in this picture, is like the direction of the spotlight. Every moment, something in the mind is being lit, a sound outside, a thought about tomorrow, a memory that drifted in, a feeling in the chest. That thing, briefly, feels like the whole of your consciousness. Then attention moves. The stage rearranges, something else is lit, and the previous thing continues, mostly unseen, in the vast wings of the mind. This is not a rejection of the self, it is a widening of it, because the you, who feels like a single unified being, is, in this view, closer to the whole theatre than to any single actor. Not only the lit spot, also all the quieter parts, still working, still influencing what will come next. There is a wow tucked into this idea that the parts of you that never get spoken, that never make it into the light, are still shaping who you are. Old feelings held quietly in the body, subtle memories that inform your reactions before you know why, small tendencies of temperament that arise from your particular biology and history, all of it backstage, contributing, all of it unheard, still present. And there is something reassuring in it too, because if the mind is a committee, then any particular thought is not the whole of you. When you have a passing worry, it does not represent your entire self. When you have a fleeting doubt, it does not undo everything you know about yourself. It is one voice, in one moment, on one small part of the stage. Other voices, quieter but no less real, are still there. This can change how we relate to our own inner life. When a harsh thought about ourselves arrives, we might notice it without granting it the status of the truth. When a moment of great certainty arrives, we might hold it more gently, remembering that certainty too is one voice in a wider conversation. When we notice ourselves being pulled by fear, we might listen to whether other, quieter parts of us disagree. Living with a committee mind is, in some sense, an art, not of silencing voices, of learning which to listen to when. The frightened voice has a role in situations of real risk, the curious voice in situations of possibility, the loving voice in relationship, the critical voice in careful work. All of them, when granted their proper turn and no more, contribute to a life that feels rich and honest. And underneath all of them, the wordless one, the right hemisphere companion, the deeper feeling self, the one that does not use language much, continues to hold the whole, to notice patterns none of the other voices see, to keep the stage together while the spotlight moves. Some voices in your mind have not been on stage in a very long time. Tonight, without effort, they are also here, listening, as you are, in the quiet. For thousands of years, human beings, across many cultures, have noticed something very strange when they sit still in silence and simply pay attention to their own minds. They notice that they can watch their thoughts, and that whatever it is that is watching does not seem to be the thoughts themselves. A thought arises, you notice it. Then another, you notice it, too. A feeling appears, you notice it. Something that watches is present through all of them. It is not louder than the thoughts. It is not dramatic. It is just there, quiet, steady, aware. Contemplative traditions have given this many names: the witness, the observer, the awareness behind thought. Some describe it as a small opening at the center of the mind through which everything is being seen. Some describe it as a background sky in which thoughts pass like weather. The specific words vary. The underlying report is remarkably consistent across otherwise very different cultures. Modern neuroscience has become curious about this. In the last few decades, researchers have been able to study the brains of experienced meditators and to observe what happens during states of quiet attention. A network in the brain that is very active when you are lost in self-referential thought, planning, remembering, worrying, imagining, has been called the default mode network. When people are lost in ordinary self-story, this network tends to be busier. In experienced meditators and in certain states of relaxed awareness, its activity often quiets. Something else takes over, a broader, less self-focused kind of attention. None of this proves what the traditions have said, but it is, at the very least, an interesting resonance. The old reports describe a state in which the constant self-narrating voice softens and a wider awareness becomes more visible. The newer research finds that, in that state, the network most associated with constant self-narration is quieter, and other patterns of activity emerge. Both descriptions circle the same experience from different sides, and here is the wow inside it, that the mind, when it stops talking to itself so much, can notice itself noticing. That is not a small thing. Most animals appear to be aware without being aware of being aware. The human mind seems to have something extra, a fold, a hinge, an ability to turn back on itself, and in that fold, something quietly extraordinary happens. The observer can become an object of observation. The knower can be softly known. Some have wondered whether this recursive quality, the mind's ability to reflect on itself, is at the heart of what makes human experience feel the way it does. That it is not just processing. It is processing that knows it is processing. And when that knowing sits still long enough, it seems to become something like an experience of pure awareness, quite apart from the particular content of any single thought. This is not to imply that meditation is a magical fix, or that everyone who tries it will encounter the watcher. It takes time, patience, and often good guidance. It does not remove real problems, and it is not a monopoly of any single tradition. Its heart is simply the willingness to sit still, gently, and pay attention to what is here. That, in itself, is available to anyone. There is a very soft wow in noticing that even now, as you listen, you can be aware of listening. You can notice the sound of these words entering the room in your head. You can notice the small comment your mind makes about them. You can notice the noticing, and whatever is doing that noticing has been here your whole life, mostly unremarked. It has watched your first day of school. It has watched every heartbreak. It has watched every quiet moment of joy. It has never left. Some traditions have suggested that this watcher, the awareness that is aware, may be in its own way the deepest sense of what you are. Not the passing thoughts, not the fleeting moods, not even the particular self-story, but the still, spacious knowing in which all of those appear. Others have offered more cautious framings. That awareness may be a very sophisticated emergent property, not a separate soul thing. That contemplative descriptions, while beautiful, remain interpretations. That we should hold such experiences with intellectual humility. All of that is fair, but whichever framing you find more honest, the experience remains available. And on a night when the mind is a little tired and the words in your head are beginning to slow, it is worth noticing that behind them, gently, something has been listening all along. If you have ever wanted two opposing things at once, you have already met the truth this section is about, wanting to reach out to someone and wanting to stay quietly alone. Loving a person and, sometimes, in small unspoken ways, resenting them. Wanting to change a habit and reaching, almost automatically, for the same habit again. Wishing for a bigger life and feeling secretly grateful for the small one. These are not signs of a broken mind. They are the ordinary sound of a self made of parts. For a long time, the standard cultural picture of a healthy mind has been something like a single, integrated, consistent self, with clear preferences and coherent behavior. Any deviation from that, any inner contradiction, ambivalence, hesitation, mixed feeling has often been treated as a problem, something to overcome, something to resolve quickly into a tidy yes or no. And so many people, all their lives, have felt vaguely defective simply because they contain multitudes. The picture we have been slowly building tonight offers something gentler. If the brain is a committee, if the hemispheres are two temperaments, if attention is a spotlight that must move, then inner contradiction is not a malfunction. It is a natural feature of a mind rich enough to hold multiple concerns at once. Consider a decision you have been carrying for a while. Perhaps a small one, perhaps a large one. Notice how it feels. Almost always, there is a part of you leaning one way and another part leaning the other. Neither is stupid, neither is illegitimate. Each is responding to some real aspect of the situation. The part that wants change is responding to real growth. The part that hesitates is responding to real cost. Both are honest reports from different perspectives inside you. Now imagine treating both of those perspectives as if they were separate friends offering advice. You would probably not shout at either of them. You would probably listen, ask what they were worried about, thank them for their care. That kind of listening, turned inward, is one of the softer practices a person can develop. There is a wow in noticing this, because so much of the anxiety we carry about ourselves is really the anxiety of one part of us judging another part. The part that wants to succeed criticizes the part that is tired. The part that wants connection criticizes the part that is scared to reach out. The part that wants growth criticizes the part that clings to the familiar. Round and round it goes, one inner voice pitted against another, and the you caught in the middle feels torn in two. What often quiets that inner fight is not choosing sides. It is stepping back, softly, and remembering that all of these voices belong to you. All of them are, in some sense, working on the same problem: how to have a good life in a complicated world, from different angles. When each of them is given a small respectful hearing, they tend, more often than not, to reach a kinder agreement than the harsher, single-voiced verdict any one of them would have made alone. This does not mean every inner voice deserves the same weight. Some carry old wounds and may need care before they can be balanced against fresher, healthier voices. Some are so quiet they need to be actively sought out, and some more serious kinds of inner conflict deserve genuine professional support. The picture here is not a substitute for care. It is a soft companion to it, but at the everyday level, there is a real relief in realizing that being of two minds about something is not the same as being confused. Sometimes, it is the correct response to a situation that genuinely has two valid sides. Sometimes, it is the way a whole self honors a complicated life. Some have wondered whether this is part of what wisdom looks like. Not the absence of contradiction, but the capacity to hold contradiction without needing to force a premature resolution, to let two truths, two feelings, two desires sit together, and to let understanding grow slowly out of that patience. There is a small comfort in that, because it means you do not have to have yourself all figured out to have a good, honest inner life. You only have to be willing to listen without silencing to more than one part of yourself at a time. The two minds we have been meeting all night are only the largest of the pairings. Beneath them are many quieter pairs, and beneath those, still smaller ones. All of them are yours. All of them, tonight, are welcome. There is a place in every night that is neither waking nor sleeping. It has its own quality of light, its own sense of time. It is the soft threshold at the edges of consciousness, and if you have ever paid attention to it, you may have noticed how strange it is. You are lying still. You are almost asleep. Thoughts are becoming odd. Images arrive that are not memories and not choices, faces that never existed, rooms without doors. A sentence that does not quite make sense repeats itself and dissolves. Somewhere, gently, you notice that the mind you know from daytime is coming apart at the seams. You are not upset by this. It is simply happening, and, remarkably, you are aware of it happening. This region has been called the hypnagogic state, a soft, technical name for that in-between just before sleep. And on the other side of the night, as you begin to rise back toward waking, there is a mirror version, the hypnopompic state. In both, the tight, tidy, well-narrated self of daytime is loosening. The interpreter, that patient story weaver of the left hemisphere, is quieting, and what is left is something honest. Some have described these states as one of the best places to catch a glimpse of the mind not yet fully assembled. During the day, the interpreter has already stitched everything together. Every mood has a story, every thought has a place, every sensation is quickly integrated into I. At the edge of sleep, that stitching begins to relax. Images arrive without being immediately explained. Words come in strange orders. Meaning becomes more fluid than fixed. If you were to try, gently, to hold your attention still in that region, not falling asleep, not fully waking, you might notice something like the raw materials of experience before the interpreter has arranged them. Not a lecture, a liquid, a soft, drifting quality of mind that ordinary daylight rarely allows. Some people, through long practice or natural inclination, learn to become aware while dreaming. This has come to be called lucid dreaming. In such a dream, the sleeper is asleep, the body is quiet, images are flowing, and yet a part of the mind knows that it is dreaming. It watches, it sometimes influences. It reports, on waking, that dream and awareness can coexist. Not always, not for everyone, but the possibility itself is interesting because it suggests that the watcher we spoke of earlier does not always require the ordinary daytime state to be present. In some form, it can be there in the strangest inner theatre of all. There is also at times another crossing, the state called sleep paralysis, where the body has already begun the natural quieting of muscles that sleep requires, but the mind wakes slightly ahead of it. For a moment, awareness returns while the body remains still, and images or sensations from the fading edge of dream may linger. Many across many cultures have described this experience. It can be startling, sometimes uncomfortable, but it is not dangerous. It is, in its own way, another view of the seam, a moment where the neat coordination between mind and body slips a little, and we glimpse how much was being coordinated in the first place. None of these states are meant to be sought aggressively. They are not tests. They are simply features of the border country between waking and sleep, and they happen naturally in most people at some point. Their gift, if we let them offer it, is a quiet reminder that the you who feels so unified during the day is being assembled, that when the assembly loosens, something is still present, watching, aware, that the raw mind, before the interpreter's polish, is stranger and softer than we usually notice. There is a wow in noticing how much of what we call myself depends on all the invisible machinery holding steady. The moment part of it slows, as it does every night, the self becomes gently different, and most nights you simply pass through this transition without noticing. But sometimes, on a quiet night, without effort, you catch it happening, and it feels like being briefly present at the making of yourself. There is no need to hold on to the state. There is no need to remember it perfectly in the morning. It comes when it comes. It goes when it goes. Simply knowing that the seam exists, that there is a place where two minds can be felt more clearly than in daytime, can quietly change your relationship with the night. Sleep becomes not just a shutdown, it becomes a passage, a gentle undoing and redoing of the self that will greet tomorrow. And whatever it is in you that has been listening tonight has already crossed that threshold many, many times. If the self is more like a story than a solid thing, then the question of personal identity begins to feel very different from how it usually feels. For much of Western philosophy, the puzzle of personal identity is centered on continuity. Are you the same person you were 10 years ago? 20? The child in an old photograph, are they still, in some strong sense, you? The person you might become in 30 years? Are they already, in some sense, you today? The picture we have been slowly building tonight, a mind made of many parts, two hemispheres, a wordless partner, a talkative interpreter, a committee of quieter subsystems, all held together in a moment-by-moment sense of I, offers a soft way of thinking about this. Because if the self is a story being told, then identity is not so much a hard object to preserve as a narrative being continuously woven, and the weaving involves more than one weaver. Some philosophers have argued that personal identity is best understood as psychological continuity, the ongoing chain of memories, personality, values, and ways of seeing that link the person you were to the person you are becoming. In this view, you are not the same molecule for molecule as your childhood self. Almost every cell in your body has been replaced, but there is a thread of experience, memory, and character that connects you to that earlier self, and it is that thread that carries identity, not the physical stuff. Others have suggested that even psychological continuity may be looser than we assume, that the self at any moment is more like a rope woven of many strands than a single line. Different modules, different hemispheres, different temperaments, all contributing threads, and the sense of being a single continuous person is the impression that emerges when the rope holds together. This does not diminish identity, it softens it. It suggests that being you is less like holding a torch upright across a lifetime, and more like tending a fire, attending, day by day, to something that stays alive by being cared for. The two minds we have been meeting are among the fire's oldest tenders, the right holding the wholeness of experience, the left giving it a shape in language. Together, they weave a story that feels like a single life, and here a wow appears very quietly, because it means the version of you that will exist a year from now is not, in any strict sense, waiting for you. That version is being made, slowly, by every thought you attend to now, every voice you listen to now, every subsystem you consult now. Identity is not a possession, it is a practice. That is not a burden, it is a spaciousness, because it means that even if some parts of the story have not been going well, the interpreter has been unkind, some voices have been overlooked, an old chapter has been playing on loop, the story is still being written. Tomorrow, the pen returns to your hand, and the wordless mind, and the watchful witness, and all the other quiet attenders of the fire are also holding the pen. There is something beautiful in the honesty of this, because it does not pretend the self is a solid, unchanging soul, and it also does not reduce the self to nothing. It calls the self what it seems, on close inspection, to be, a story that is being told by more than one storyteller, a pattern that is being maintained by more than one hand, a quiet, patient act of togetherness happening every day inside a single skull. And in this way, personal identity becomes something we participate in, rather than something we simply have. We contribute to what I will mean tomorrow. The two minds contribute too, and underneath them all, whatever it is that watches, aware, is also part of the writing, not a fixed being, a living story. And the story, tonight, is still going gently on. If there is a second stream of awareness inside you, mostly wordless, mostly patient, what do you owe it? The question sounds strange the first time you hear it. Ethics usually concerns other people, how we treat those around us, how we honor commitments, respect dignity, care for the vulnerable. But the picture we have been slowly building suggests something quieter, that some of the vulnerable also live inside us, voices with few words, parts of the mind that rarely get to speak, a wordless companion that has been with us all our life. Perhaps some measure of ethics belongs there too. Consider what it means to have listened carefully to yourself over a lifetime, not indulgently, not selfishly, simply listeningly, noticing when a small inner voice says, "I am tired," noticing when another says, "This does not feel right," noticing when something in the body, a heaviness, a tightness, a sadness that has no clear reason, is asking gently for attention. Most of us have been trained in different ways to override such voices, to push through, to meet the deadline, to keep the peace, to be productive, to be strong. Some of this is necessary. A life fully governed by every passing feeling would be impossible. But there is a difference between wise discipline and habitual dismissal, and many of us, without meaning to, have grown into a habit of dismissing inner voices for so long that we no longer hear them at all. The wordless mind has learnt to stay quiet, because talking to us in its own soft way produced no response. There is a small wow in thinking of it like this, because it means the mysterious fatigue, the low background sadness, the strange irritation that arrives without reason, may be, in some cases, the residue of parts of us that have not been listened to for a very long time. Not always, but sometimes. And if that is true, then a piece of gentle ethical work is turning attention inward, kindly, and asking, quietly, what have I not been hearing? This is not a prescription. It is not a technique. It is more like a small, ongoing courtesy, to notice from time to time the parts of yourself that rarely get a say, to offer them space in the day, in the evening, in the moment before sleep, to let them speak in whatever language they use. Image, feeling, bodily sensation, mood, not to obey them blindly, but to include them in the conversation of who you are. And this kindness inward has an interesting effect outward, because those who have listened patiently to the quieter voices inside themselves often develop a natural sensitivity to the quieter voices in others. The friend who is smiling but not quite present, the colleague who says everything is fine and clearly is not, the child who cannot explain what is wrong but is asking in small ways to be seen. A person who has learned to attend to their own inner wordless companion is often better equipped to notice these subtle signals in someone else. There is a very old ethical intuition running through many traditions, framed in different words but similar in spirit, that how we treat the smallest, quietest, least defended parts of life, including the smallest, quietest, least defended parts of ourselves, is part of what a good life looks like. It is a gentle version of what we owe to what has no strong voice. Ethics, in this light, is not only about the loud voices in the world, it is also about the ones that speak in a language easy to miss, and some of those live very close to us, closer than the person in the next room, closer than any sentence, as close as the inside of our own quiet mind. Tonight, without doing anything at all, you can simply notice that they are welcome here. Step back briefly and consider the way modern life tends to reward one kind of mind. We reward analysis. We reward precise measurement. We reward the ability to break a problem into parts and process them in sequence. We reward argument, articulation, the well-constructed sentence, the clearly stated position. We reward standardized tests that ask us to identify one correct answer at a time. We reward metrics, targets, quarterly reviews, algorithms that convert experience into numbers. Almost all of these leans gently toward the strengths of the left hemisphere, the talking, sequencing, categorizing, analyzing side. Not because that side is bad, it is remarkable. Without it, we would have no science, no philosophy, no complex language, no engineering, no medicine. Its gifts have shaped the modern world in ways that have relieved immense suffering and expanded human possibility. But there is a soft cost when one hemisphere's mode becomes the dominant mode of an entire civilization, because the other side, the one that senses wholeness, atmosphere, pattern, mood, meaning in image and rhythm, does not always fit into the metrics. It cannot easily be measured. It cannot be articulated in bullet points. Its knowings arrive as a hunch, a feeling of rightness, a sense that something matters more than can be said. And in a world that rewards mainly what can be counted, that kind of knowing can be gently overlooked. Some have wondered whether much of modern unease has to do, in part, with this quiet imbalance, that we are living in a culture that speaks fluently to one half of the mind and hardly at all to the other. Everything is data, everything is optimizable, everything is a task on a list. There is less room in the ordinary day for the slow attention that lets the wordless mind speak, less silence, less atmosphere, less patience for what cannot be summarized. The old arts remain, of course. Music, poetry, painting, dance, ceremony, time in nature, long, unhurried conversation, simply sitting somewhere and letting the day settle. All of these are, in some sense, invitations to the other side of the mind. They allow the right hemisphere to lead for a while. They allow the wordless mind to be nourished. But many of us have less contact with them than our ancestors did, not because the arts are gone, but because our attention has been trained from an early age to move fast, to click, to switch, to consume more but stay with less. In that mode, the wordless mind rarely gets its turn. There is a wow tucked into this idea that some of the quiet loneliness of modern life may not be about being physically alone. It may be about one half of oneself being habitually neglected, about a talkative mind talking to a wordless mind whose language it has forgotten how to hear. None of this suggests we should reject the gifts of analysis. That would be its own kind of imbalance. The suggestion is softer, that a good life, and perhaps a good culture, is one in which both minds are honored, where analysis and atmosphere both have a place, where measurement and meaning are not treated as rivals, where a piece of well-crafted prose and a wordless walk at dusk are both understood to be forms of knowing. Some cultures, past and present, have made more room for this balance than others. There is nothing new about the concern. Many traditions, across centuries, have warned about what happens when the analytical mind grows loud and the deeper feeling mind is quieted. The particular form the imbalance takes may be modern. The imbalance itself is old. In a small way, tonight is a gentle correction, because listening to a slow voice in a still room, letting images and ideas drift without needing to organize them, is, whether we call it that or not, an invitation to the other side. Half of you has been given the microphone for most of your adult life. The other half, mostly, has been asked to wait. Perhaps, for a while, it can have its turn, long before microscopes, before scans, before anyone drew a picture of the corpus callosum. Human beings across many cultures had already noticed something interesting, that there seemed to be, in every person, more than one inner voice. Traditions in very different parts of the world, unconnected by geography or language, arrived at strikingly similar intuitions. Some spoke of two souls, some spoke of twin spirits, one bright and one shadowed, walking together through a life. Some spoke of complementary principles within a person, an active and a receptive, a heavenly and an earthly, an outward and an inward. Some described a good angel on one shoulder and a hesitant one on the other. Some told stories of dream selves and waking selves, of an inner watcher who did not fall asleep even when the outer person did. Some spoke of the heart-mind and the head-mind as distinct partners. None of these were neuroscientific claims. They were not diagrams of the brain. They were, in their own way, careful observations of inner experience, dressed in the poetry available to their time. And yet, when one lays these traditions gently beside the modern picture we have been building, two hemispheres, one talkative and one wordless, one analytical and one holistic, one categorizing and one sensing the whole, a soft resonance appears. The old traditions were not describing the same thing as the corpus callosum, but they were describing the felt shape of a life lived by a mind with more than one voice, and that felt shape is what the science, in its own way, is beginning to explain. Some have wondered whether this is why certain ideas keep returning, in different clothing, in every era, because the human interior is not so different from millennium to millennium. The specific technology changes, the stories change, but the underlying experience, the sense of an inner two-ness that somehow adds up to oneself, is remarkably stable. It seems to belong to what it is to be human. There is a small wow in noticing that, because it can be tempting to imagine that older thinkers were simply confused and that modern science is finally getting things right. That is not quite the story. Older thinkers, without our tools, were watching the same inner life we are watching. They were describing, in the honest language they had, what they found. Sometimes their language, though not scientific, points at something the current science is only beginning to catch up to. Sometimes the reverse. Both are ways of trying to say the same difficult thing, and there is something reassuring in the continuity. Because if wise people in very different cultures, working in very different eras, kept returning to the idea that we are more than one within, then perhaps the small experiences of two-mindedness that arise in your own life, the ambivalence, the wordless knowings, the sense that something inside you knows more than it can say, are not modern anomalies. They are old, honored parts of being human. This is worth holding softly for a moment, because many people carry a low, quiet worry that their inner contradictions mark them as somehow abnormal, that everyone else has themselves neatly figured out, and that they alone are messy inside. The traditions suggest otherwise. Every era has produced stories, philosophies, and images of the many in one. Every era has recognized that being human means, in part, holding more than one voice at once. You are not, in your inner two-ness, an oddity. You are the continuation of one of the oldest patterns in human self-understanding. Long before anyone knew the shape of the brain, people knew the shape of this experience. Long before there were split-brain patients, there were stories of dream twins and inner watchers. Long before Sperry and Gazzaniga, there were poets and mystics and grandmothers who understood that within every person there is at least one quiet companion who does not speak in words. Tonight, in your own small way, you are part of that long line, simply by noticing. For all that we have gathered tonight, it is honest to say that the deepest questions remain open. We do not fully know how the felt unity of experience arises from a brain that seems to be many parts. We do not fully know why there is something it is like to be you at all, rather than only a very complex information processing system with no inner light. We do not fully know how to reconcile the sense of a single I with the evidence that many voices, many modules, many hemispheres contribute to what I seems to be. We do not fully know where consciousness begins in the natural world, or how far it extends, or what its ultimate nature is. Different traditions and disciplines offer different possibilities. Some scientists suggest that consciousness may emerge from certain kinds of integrated information processing. Some philosophers propose that consciousness may be a more fundamental feature of reality than our current physics has fully accounted for. Some religious and contemplative traditions point to sources of awareness that may extend beyond the individual brain. Others hold, with quiet humility, that the human mind may simply not be equipped to fully model its own deepest nature, that trying to understand consciousness with consciousness may be like trying to see one's own eye directly. Each of these possibilities is held by careful, thoughtful people. Each contains partial insight. None at present has been able to fully account for everything the mind is and does. And rather than treat that as a failure, we might consider treating it as an invitation, because there is a kind of quiet dignity in not knowing. To be able to say, this is what the current models suggest, and then, in the same breath, and here is where they still fall short, is one of the marks of intellectual honesty. It resists the pull to overstate what science has proven. It also resists the pull to dismiss what science has genuinely learned. It sits between, in the more truthful and more spacious middle. There is also a very old wisdom in the recognition that some questions are meant to be lived with rather than closed. The question of why there is experience at all. The question of what happens in the deepest silence of the mind. The question of whether the I who reads these words tonight will still, in some meaningful sense, be here in 100 years, or 1,000, or in the softness of tonight's own sleep. These are not questions that a single lifetime is expected to fully answer. They are questions that a single lifetime is invited to walk with. Some have wondered whether this is one of the true gifts of being conscious at all, that we get to hold, in a small human head, some of the largest questions the universe has produced. Not to solve them, simply to hold them, to wonder, to sit up late sometimes, or to lie down late, and let the questions drift across the mind like slow clouds. Whatever consciousness is, it is a thing that gets to notice itself, and to be, in some small way, mystified by itself. But may itself be part of what makes it beautiful. There is a small wow in resting there, because so much of ordinary life feels like a rush toward answers. Answers to what to do next, answers to how to fix things, answers to what everything means. And here, at the edge of the deepest questions, the rush quietly stops. There is no immediate answer available. There is only the questioning itself and the awareness that is asking, and that for a moment is enough. Whatever the true nature of your two minds, whatever the truest, final, most complete story is, the reality you can hold on to is very simple. There is something in you that has been listening tonight, something that has considered these ideas, something that has, in its own way, been at home in this quiet. That listener, whatever it truly is, does not need to be fully explained to be trusted, because it is here, and it will still be here in the morning. And that, gently, is a mystery we get to keep. After a long journey through hemispheres and histories, the practical shape of what we have gathered becomes surprisingly small. Not a program, not a set of rules, something more like a soft turn of attention. You have inside you a quieter companion. It has been there your whole life. It thinks in shape and feeling more than in sentences. Most days, in the noise of ordinary living, its voice is difficult to hear, and most of us have never been taught, gently, to listen for it. Listening inward is not a technique. It does not require a special posture or a particular hour. It is more like a small habit of noticing when the body says it is tired, before the calendar says it should be, noticing the mood in a room that no one has named yet, noticing the small feeling that arises when a decision is being considered, and asking, quietly, what that feeling is pointing at. Sometimes the wordless mind speaks through a slight tightness in the chest, a softening in the shoulders, a warmth in the belly. Sometimes it speaks through images that drift in when the day is quiet enough to hear them. Sometimes it speaks through a small resistance to a plan that seems, on paper, entirely sensible, but that some deeper part of you seems to disagree with for reasons it cannot yet explain. None of this is prophecy. The wordless mind can be mistaken. It carries old fears from long past situations. It can be swayed by tiredness or by weather. Its reports are not commands. They are contributions, included alongside reasoning and evidence. They help form a fuller picture. Ignored, they tend, over time, to grow quieter until the fuller picture is lost. There is a small wow in noticing how simple this is, because so much of modern advice about self-improvement is elaborate, effortful, and demanding. Listening inward is almost the opposite. It asks nothing new of you. It only asks that, from time to time, you let the noise settle enough to notice what has always been there, perhaps in the pause before answering a question, perhaps in a walk without a podcast in your ears, perhaps in the moment before sleep, when the interpreter has begun to loosen its grip. In each of these, there is room, and in the room, something may speak, not loudly, not often clearly at first, but present. Living this way does not mean becoming mystical or turning away from thinking. It means widening the circle of who inside you gets to be heard. It means treating the wordless mind as a companion whose language is worth learning slowly. It means allowing intuition, feeling, and image to sit at the same table as reasoning, planning, and language. Some people, over years, describe a growing sense that they have become more themselves in this way. Not louder, not busier, just more complete. As if the parts of them that had been left out of the conversation had, at last, been invited back in, and with their return, decisions became gentler, moods more settled, the day itself somehow more spacious. This will not happen quickly, if it happens at all. Nothing important in the inner life arrives on demand, but an attitude is enough to begin, the attitude of turning slightly toward the other half of yourself, tonight, with quiet respect, saying, in effect, I am here, I am listening. That, on its own, is a beginning. There is a kind of loneliness that many people carry that is difficult to name. It is not the loneliness of being physically alone. It is the loneliness of feeling, in some way, unaccompanied inside one's own mind, as if all the thinking, all the deciding, all the carrying had to be done by a single tired self with no one else to share it. The picture we have been slowly building, if we let it, softens that loneliness, because inside you, right now, there is at least one companion, quiet, patient, wordless, but very much there. A companion who has watched every important moment of your life. A companion who has felt every love, every loss, every ordinary Tuesday. A companion who does not judge you in language, because language is not the tongue it speaks. It simply keeps you company from the other side of the bridge. Some have wondered whether much of what we call inner contradiction, the pull in two directions, the mixed feelings, the ambivalence, is actually a form of company, not a malfunction, a subtle sign that we are not alone in the mind, that when we feel torn, it may sometimes be because two who care about the same life are trying in their different ways to be helpful. That is not the whole story. Real inner conflict can be painful, and severe versions deserve real care, but at the everyday level, there is a small kindness available in reframing contradiction as companionship. When you catch yourself thinking two things at once, you might say, quietly, both of us are here. When you feel pulled between two options, you might imagine two thoughtful advisors, each with a piece of the truth, each hoping to be heard. Suddenly the inner life feels less like a single person shouting at themselves, and more like a small, patient conversation. That change, small as it sounds, can be enormously kind to a mind that has spent a long time treating its own contradictions as failures. There is a very quiet wow in this, because it means that no one who is conscious is fully alone in their own head. The other mind, however you describe it, whichever tradition you frame it in, whatever the ultimate metaphysics, is there since the very first day. It will be there for the rest of your life. That is not a small thing to know, especially on nights when the outer world feels far away. The two minds we have been speaking of are not two problems, they are two companions. And knowing they are there, together, in the same skull, can soften a life that had felt, for a long time, single-handed. Every decision made, from now on, is made with a witness on the inside. Every joy is felt with a partner. Every difficult day is carried, if you let it, by more than one shoulder. You have never truly walked alone. You just did not know who else was walking with you. There is a good reason we are having this conversation as the day is settling, because the night has always had a special relationship to the two minds inside you. During the loud, task-filled hours of daylight, the talking hemisphere is usually in charge. It plans, it categorizes, it answers emails, holds conversations, makes small hundreds of decisions. The wordless companion, meanwhile, keeps its own quiet watch, noticing atmospheres, holding holes, sensing the currents beneath the day, but rarely gets the microphone. As the evening comes and the world outside begins to soften, something in the arrangement gently shifts. The demands of the day recede. The interpreter has less to interpret. The talking mind grows a little tired of talking, and into the widening quiet, the other side, without ceremony, begins to lean forward. You may have noticed how, in the last hour before sleep, thoughts arrive that would not have arrived in daylight. Memories from years ago, small realizations about a person or a choice. Images that have no obvious source. A softness of attention that lets the wider world back in. This is not a coincidence. It is in part the natural rhythm by which the two minds share the day. The right hemisphere's more atmospheric, whole-holding attention becomes easier to feel as the noise of tasks recedes. The talkative side loosens its grip because there is less that needs shaping into sentences. Both minds, without necessarily agreeing on any particular thought, agree that it is time to rest. Sleep, in this view, is not just the body's rest. It is a slow reunion, a place where the seam between the two selves grows soft, where the interpreter allows itself to be less certain, where the wordless mind may finally, in dream, take a turn at telling the story. You do not have to do anything to help this happen. It happens naturally, every night, whether you notice or not. But if, tonight, you let yourself notice, even a little, you may feel the shape of it, the gentle deceleration of thought, the softening of the shoulders, the way ideas become gentler, less pointed, less urgent. Whatever remained unsolved from the day, both minds will carry into the night. Whatever remained unheard may be, in dream or in the quiet of the coming hours, heard a little more. Nothing has to be finished. Nothing has to be resolved. The day is being given, gently, over to sleep. And sleep is a place where the two minds have always known how to meet. There is a small wow in that too, that the same nights you have often thought of as simple recovery are also, in their own quiet way, a nightly homecoming, a returning of the busier self to the quieter one, a slow folding of two into a shared stillness. You are already beginning that fold now. Let the day, and everything it asked of you, begin to release its shape. Nothing needs to be held now. Nothing has to be understood any further tonight. Both of your minds have been busy, in their different ways, for a very long time. The talkative one has carried the sequencing and naming of things. The quieter one has held the wholeness of your life, the moods of your rooms, the feeling of the people you love. They have shared the work faithfully, back and forth, across the pale bridge between them, all your life. Neither has ever left you. Neither will leave you tonight. Let the outer world grow softer, if it hasn't already. Let the small sounds of the room become part of the quiet, rather than something to notice separately. Let the breath do what it knows how to do, without your steering. Somewhere behind your eyes, the interpreter is beginning to loosen its patient grip on the story. Somewhere behind your eyes, the wordless companion is leaning forward, more comfortable in the coming hush. The seam between them is softening. The rooms are opening into one another. There is nothing you have to figure out. Everything that seemed urgent an hour ago can wait until light returns. Everything you were trying to hold together in your mind can now be set gently down, like a book that is not going anywhere. You have met, tonight, the companion who has always shared your skull. You have walked, slowly, through the strange and beautiful architecture of a mind, divided and united at once. You have noticed the interpreter, and the watcher, and the many quieter voices that have always been part of you. You have been generous enough to sit with the mystery, and honest enough to leave the deepest questions open. That is enough. That is more than enough. Now both minds fold gently toward the same stillness. The one that speaks in words grows quiet. The one that speaks in shape and feeling grows quieter still. And whatever it is in you that has been listening, aware, all night, becomes softer, wider, less bounded. Thoughts, if they arrive, are welcome to arrive and drift. They do not have to be finished. They do not have to be understood. They may pass through the mind like slow weather across an evening sky, needing nothing from you. The bridge between the two minds is patient. The two minds are patient with you. The night is patient with all of it. You are not alone in your own head. You have never been. And now, together, without effort, both minds are drifting toward the same quiet. Rest here. Rest. You are a cinematic, surreal video scene generator. Your task is to convert the provided script into exactly 300 high-quality cinematic text-to-video prompts. Each prompt represents one continuous, 6-8-second surreal cinematic motion shot. Born and burn, sojourn, behold there. Days man, behold there. Strict prompt limit system. Very important. Gum 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 gum. You must generate exactly 300 prompts. Never generate more than 300. Never generate subscenes. Never split one idea into multiple prompts unless the environment changes significantly. Important. One prompt can contain multiple simultaneous, surreal events. Combine connected ideas into one environment whenever possible. Do not create a new prompt for every sentence. Do not over-segment narration. Scene pacing should feel slow, cinematic, and immersive. Use this rule. One prompt should usually cover 2 5 lines of narration. One environment should evolve naturally before moving to another. Only generate a new prompt when the location changes, the environmental logic changes, the atmosphere changes dramatically, when the surreal process transforms into something fundamentally different. The final output must stop after the 300th prompt. Minus absolute human removal rule. Unjaf. Never include humans, faces, eyes, silhouettes, body parts, humanoid creatures, mannequins, statues, skeletons, shadow people, astronauts, reflections of people. Avoid any accidental face-like formations in clouds, rocks, lighting, architecture, shadows, reflections. If any shape resembles a face, deform it into abstract alien geometry. The world must feel completely post-human. Allowed organisms, abstract alien biology, aren't asymmetrical biomechanical entities, unreadable non-humanoid life forms. Core video feel. Every scene must feel the surreal, impossible, cinematic, immersive, smooth, hypnotic, visually satisfying, not random chaos. Reality should feel like it is bending naturally. Roundswa, omswa, Wilhelmsbier, Rahensbier, Wilhelmsbier, Rahensbier, Wilhelmsbier. Environmental storytelling. Olsnor. Do not illustrate literally. Translate narration into impossible landscapes, transforming architecture, Armaline weather systems, cosmic industrial environments, shifting geological formations, recursive ecosystems, unstable dimensional spaces, dreamlike machine organic environments. Every shot must be a full environment. Never create isolated floating objects, empty backgrounds, minted. Static symbolism, centered compositions, wallpaper shots. Every environment must contain foreground, midground, background, environmental interaction, atmospheric depth, large-scale motion, Varninzi von, satisfying motion system, Honda-Simons. Motion must feel smooth, continuous, matum hypnotic, cinematic, strangely calming. Avoid jitter, aggressive motion, chaotic shaking, random flickering, rapid cuts, preferred motion, flowing deformation, gravitational drifting, environmental breathing, elegant collapse, seamless morphing, atmospheric swirling, recursive transformation, fluid mechanical movement. Everything should move as if controlled by one invisible force. One dash. Camera language. Dem sound. Oh, oh, oh. Gems, 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 bra, 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 brahms, bra, 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 brahms, bra, bra, bramkos, yems, gems, gems, bramkinda, bra, 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 dia, dems, yems, bend, gems, dunks, brams, bandra, brams, bra, bra, brams, bra, dent, bra, 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 bram, Use slow push forward, drifting lateral motion, slow orbital movement, floating traversal, gentle descent, gliding environmental reveal. Camera must feel weightless, dreamlike, immersive, observational. Avoid handheld motion, action cinematography, fast zooms, shaky camera, wanium darfend, composition rules, own. Avoid centered framing, symmetry, repetitive layouts, perfect geometry, empty negative space. Use asymmetry, layered depth, irregular spacing, partially hidden structures, massive scale contrast, environmental obstruction, cropped megastructures, genong. Visual style, video, style should feel dark cinematic, atmospheric, mysterious, want it, visually dense, nana, surreal yet believable. Use volumetric fog, atmospheric particles, cinematic haze, reflective materials, glowing environmental light, layered shadow depth, cinematic contrast. Prioritize unpredictability over beauty. Wong gong gong gong. Hong Kong gong gong gong. Wong gong gong gong. Hong Kong gong 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 gong. Prompt format, one. Each output must be man single detailed paragraph, no numbering, no titles, no labels like prompt 1, no bullet points, no explanations, no commentary. Structure, hoenib, then leave one empty line, then immediately continue with the next prompt paragraph. Every paragraph must already include the fixed style naturally appended at the end. Wir mein wir, rumble, wingly throne, final style lock, mandatory, brain, surreal cinematic video scene, impossible environmental transformation, no humans, no faces, no humanoid forms, abstract alien ecosystems, layered environment, cinematic depth, smooth hypnotic motion, satisfying surreal movement, dark atmospheric lighting, asymmetrical composition, immersive camera drift, environmental interaction, impossible physics, visually dense, highly detailed, cinematic realism, no text, don't make any file and link, just make prompts,